So today I want to talk about the Boondocks, and I'm going to do a video series reviewing all the episodes of the Boondocks because I think it's a very, very important series, and it's also something that's a little lost to time. And I also think that it's really interesting that this series came out in the mid 2000s, so it's almost 20 years old. You know, people like me are getting old who watched it in middle school, no, watched it in high school. And then also, it's a little cringe because it was done at a time where where politically incorrect humor was very popular. Nowadays, you really can't do that unless you're South Park. So, the Garden Party is the first episode of the Boondocks, and there's a lot of different themes in this episode. So, what happens is that Huey, Riley, and Granddad move into the neighborhood, and then what happens is that they have a bunch of stereotypes about white people, like the big stereotype that Huey has is that white people can easily get their feelings hurt. Like he says something like he has a dream where he says Ronald Reagan is the devil, the government's lying about 9/11, and that Jesus is black, and he has this dream that it causes white people to lose their minds and they all become violent. And then with Granddad, his or with Robert Freeman, Granddad, his character's kind of like, he's an old man. He feels like it's an accomplishment to move into a mostly white neighborhood, and it's almost like his whole entire purpose in life is to kind of be like, well, going to a white neighborhood is the cat's meow. It shows that I'm above poor blacks, or this is just like the best I can kind of do. So it's almost like I want to mirror. I feel successful if I mirror the success of white people, type of thing. And then also with Riley, he still has the same like anti-white feelings. Like as I said, like he's inspired by black youth. That's kind of manipulated by the media. So he has very much like, okay, well, white people are bad because, white police officers, white people are in charge of you, or old white people might be racist. So like Ed Wuncler comes visit it, and he's like, he owns the bank, he owns the neighborhood, and Robert wants to impress him, so he goes to his garden party, and he acts like this is a big deal because this is kind of like the socialite event. And then what happens is that at that event they run into Uncle Ruckus, who is a poor African American who's racist against white people. No, he's racist against black people and other races. He sees whites as superior. So it's kind of new to him to see a bunch of black people get invited. And he's definitely very politically incorrect. But I also think that, what's funny about this whole episode is all the characters are have a form of racism and political incorrectness. And what also happens at the event is that Ed Wuncler's grandson, and Ed Wuncler III, his grandson, the grandson Ed Wuncler III, he served in Iraq, so he has PTSD. He has like very poor manners. He's supposed to be like a gangster version of George W. Bush, and I think it does a really good job talking about a couple of things. I do think that. With Ed Wuncler III, there's a couple of things. He might have some form of PTSD. He's definitely socially inappropriate. And then the other thing is that, he's an alcoholic. So it kind of is like a good metaphor for how sometimes with a bunch of rich families that they hide their problem. They don't address like mental health and other issues because there's a sense of personal shame. And definitely in the early 2000s, it was like that. There was not a lot of openness about having a mental illness. And then sometimes, if you have a relative that's a troublemaker, the best thing to do is throw money at it and just, learn how to make excuses for that person instead of saying, okay, well, this person clearly needs, mental health help. Lack of a better example, that I knew somebody in high school who was a female and, got herself in lots and lots of trouble, and it was always like, her parents would use her mental health issues and say, she has this, she has that to get her out of trouble. And then the other thing is that when she was at home, they kind of acted like she didn't have a mental health issue. Is what it is. Like her sister got pregnant, and her parents were like, you know what, put the kid up for adoption, and they're like, you know what, that's just how things are. I was actually friends of that person, but it was that same type of, we're going to throw money at it, we're going to just ignore the issue. So that's kind of Ed Wunslow III's character in a nutshell. But with Huey, one thing I like about this episode is that he kind of thinks saying those three things will stir up white people, which is that, Jesus is black, Ronald Reagan is the devil, and the government's lying about 9/11. I think that what I like is that he actually kind of learned some very powerful things, which is that his stereotype that white people lose their minds over being told the truth about things, that doesn't happen in reality. And sometimes, like, and then also the characters are very politically incorrect. They use the word articulate, and articulate means that you are an African American that speaks intelligent, but it stands out to white people because the stereotype is that it's very rare for an African American to have any form of education, to speak correctly, to not speak gangster and slang. So they kind of put Huey in this category of articulate. So you know what? Well, you're one of the few blacks that are educated. So we're just going to find you entertaining. We're going to applaud you. We're going to find you amusing. And I think that what I like is that, what Huey realizes that no matter what you say to these people, that they don't care. They're just going to keep applauding. And I think the point of it is that it's not racism that makes people complacent. It's classism that makes people complacent. Because if you're really rich, you're not going to care if Jesus is black or not. You're not going to care if a politician, which most people support, is maybe a sign of the Antichrist, and you're not going to care about 9/11. You're going to be more concerned about your riches and your royalties. Like there's a story that somebody said that all those Canadian wildfires is actually Russia putting chemicals in the air, or the U.S. government putting chemicals in the air, killing people. Do you think Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk gives a shit? No, they're too rich to care because that's their priority in life, is to be rich as possible. So I think Huey's stereotypes get turned upside down, and that's also kind of good because he's really the protagonist. And then the other thing that happens is Uncle Ruckus, that he goes on and sings a song, "Don't Trust Those New Niggers Over There." And it's kind of funny, but I also kind of think that with Ruckus's character, he's kind of almost, in a sense, I think like what Huey could be in the future without realizing it, because Huey does have some racism about white people, but ultimately, like, Uncle Ruckus's racism and stereotyping of black people, that almost leads him to forget that he's pathetic as well, in a sense that he's a hypocrite. He's an alcoholic. He has very rude manners. And ultimately, I don't think he kept his job with Ed Wunslow after, getting on a microphone, getting drunk, and then passing out unconscious. So, he's actually living up to black stereotypes without realizing it. The same way Huey is living up to black stereotypes by getting into his feelings. So it ends with Riley shooting Ed Wunslow III out of his window, and then people are applauding and not acting like it's not a big deal. And then I think that then Granddad and Ed Wunslow become friends because they both have things in common. They're both kind of really nasty people. They criticize people. They say mean comments about people. Another thing about them is that they're both very politically incorrect. Like Granddad is, race means something to Granddad. He'll point out black people. He'll point out white people. So does Ed Wunslow. And they both kind of have some power issues. I think Ed Wunslow likes knowing that he has power by controlling the Woodcrest neighborhood, and Granddad likes that he has power because he owns his house. He owns a piece of property in a mostly white neighborhood. It's like the Monopoly board owned by Mr. Monopoly, and then a house owned by the player type of thing. But I do think that this is a great introduction to all the characters. It definitely shows you that this is a controversial series, and this is a series satirizing racism. But if you look at it really deeply, it shows that how these characters are kind of formed and flawed because of their racism. And then also, I really would say that I think that with South Park, it's deeply inspired by South Park. I mean, with the Boondocks, is deeply inspired by South Park, because obviously all the characters are really metaphors for a lot of different issues. Like obviously, you look at Cartman from South Park; he's a metaphor for politically incorrect people, inspired by Archie Bunker. And then you look at people like Granddad, and he's kind of a metaphor for old black people um, who want to feel a sense of greatness by converting to white culture. Um, you look at somebody like Butters, who's a metaphor for innocent people or too kind of a person in a very mean world. And then you look like at a person like Riley, who is a metaphor for black youth being so consumed by hip hop culture that they become ignorant. And then you look at Trey Parker and Matt Stone, Stan Kyle are kind of metaphors for them, and their commentary, and Aaron McGruder's metaphorical character is Huey Freeman, and and I think it's a very interesting series. I think the Boondocks definitely is one of the best adult animated series. It's really unfortunate because the first season was such a masterpiece, and they had some of that in the second season, but really later on in the second season, they really got to a point of not being as great as the first season, because at least with all these first season episodes, they're very cerebral and very, very intelligent, and then the series just derails from that. And it's very unfortunate because definitely the Boondocks could have been one of those shows like South Park that could have had a consistent social commentary and really contribute to the medium of black satire if it had its standard. But unfortunately, it didn't. This is like the golden year was like the first season, and it's very unfortunate that they derailed from that.